Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction, Mark, and thank you, Leanne, as well, for joining in that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jamie Dobson, and I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Container Solutions. Mark's walking underneath me now. How weird is that? But I'm also the co-creator of the Software Circus conference and community event. So with that in mind, to add to what we just said, welcome to all of those people who are coming to the Circus for the very first time today, and welcome back to everybody who has joined either a community event or any previous conferences. I'm just going to check with the RC if my slides are up. He's disappeared, but you know what? While that, I don't know if my slides are up. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is Belgian peers, thank you very much, grown man's tears at aging 10 years. The main takeaway that we're hoping for people to get from this is as follows. Bad decisions, mistakes are baked into the nature of crises, right? So when we make bad decisions, we're confronted with feelings of guilt, of shame. When we switch off Slack and Zoom in the evening, our worlds can feel a little bit smaller and a little bit more lonely. I want to say to everybody today, you're not alone. This range of human emotions that we're all passing through and this fucked up collective trauma that we're all in is very normal. And any emotions that you have are completely fine. And for at least today, we can have a bit of fun with that and we can play with that. Now, specifically, the three things I would like to get into today are as follows. The first thing is, how do you frame a crisis? So the most important thing here is to try to frame a crisis or a new challenge as a problem that you and your organization can solve. So when we look at the crisis that hit Container Solutions and how we responded to it, I'm hoping that people who are struggling like we were might be able to take some practical tips away. The second big takeaway is around designing action. Once you've got a framework for the crisis, what actions should you take? There is always an infinite range of actions you can take and an infinite way in which they can be ordered. Once you've figured out what you're trying to do, that ordering should become simpler. And then finally, what was the aftermath of our crisis? What did we win? What did we lose? And this, the aftermath, the forward projection of where we want to go is very important to both getting through a crisis, surviving it, and where possible, thriving within it. So let's just start at the beginning. Where does this crisis start? Where did it start for Container Solutions? Probably in January. So we had just finished 2019. We doubled our revenues and we doubled them, for the second or third year running. And this is important because we were about to double them again in 2020. Now, if you double revenues, your cost base goes up, and that's a pretty important part of this story. We just finished our book, Cloud Native Transformation. The pre-orders were looking good. Our hiring process had developed amazingly, and we were all excited to make it more systematic and take away more biases from it. We had a raft of people on the Emerging Leadership Program, so we were future-proofing ourselves in that regard back in January. We had 2 offers on the table for investments. They would let us consolidate the German and the UK operations and continue to develop our work in North America. Container Solutions was a healthy and a happy place. All of this came to a grinding halt in a 48-hour period in March. As the imminent lockdown arrived in the UK, London started to become quieter and quieter and quieter. I was the last person to leave this office, bundling up laptops, screens, the Nintendo DS, which I have to return, Post-it notes, and everything that we would need to operate from our homes. I passed through the streets in a taxi. The streets were quiet, which is weird when it's London in the middle of the day. Most of that time was spent on the telephone, speaking to customers, speaking to suppliers, speaking to our own people. But the world was slowing down, and it eventually ground to a halt. Now, I found myself in my daughter's chair Thursday afternoon, and I started to cry. I was overwhelmed by the challenge that was facing us, and I was overwhelmed by the significance of the moment that we were living in. 3 things were on my mind. All the people who work at Container Solutions, all of them with many of them with mortgages, many of them with children, all of them with life goals that they were pursuing. I have 4 children myself. At the time, my twin babies were only 10 months old. So I was wondering, I'm just going to switch off my WhatsApp. Sorry, everybody. Live TV, don't do it. Just let me know, is my screen there again? Is my screen there, Mark? Sorry, everybody. So I had 3 children myself, 2 of them twin babies. And I could see in the worst case situation how Container Solutions might fail as a business. And then the third part of this was I don't have imposter syndrome. I am an imposter. I've never led a company this size, and I've never led a company through a global pandemic. And that would fall to me. At least a large part of that work would fall to me. And so I was upset, obviously. Now, after a while, a different narrative emerged. It was an angry narrative, a narrative that was full of expletives, but the general theme was this: are we going to curl up and die? Is this the end of this situation? Haven't we been in worse situations than this before? What are we going to do about it? Now, as this was happening, a lot of the team at Container Solutions were coming to similar conclusions. And with the benefit of hindsight, we know what was happening that week. The cognitive process of dealing with this trauma had begun. And slowly but surely, we started to accept reality. And I suppose I'd become more mature as a person because this process went quite quickly this time. This was important. The chances of us dying as a business were actually reasonably small in hindsight. But by accepting it as a possibility, we unshackled ourselves, let go of our insecurities, let go of some of our anxiety. We couldn't let go of it completely, and we started to face this reality. My wife had asked me, "Are you doing okay?" I said, "I'm fine." I went to the corner shop, picked up 4 cans of Stella, came home, had a nice Thursday evening, and I slept well. The next day was Friday the 13th of all days. And this was the day when we started to structurally attack this crisis. What did we do? Well, we started Googling and we went on Amazon and we looked for books about crisis management. And one of the things we discovered early was this: crises have got a distinct life cycle. Stage 1, preparation. This is where the seeds of the crisis are sown. What did you do last year? What did you do the year before? So even when it's an external shock, like the COVID pandemic, the seeds of the crisis are at least partially sown by you and your earlier actions. Now you've got the crisis itself. And the problem with this is you don't know how long it's going to last. So you might run scenario planning. If this customer pays on time, and if we upsell that customer, and if we cut those costs, this crisis for us will last about 12 weeks. The problem is, as the context changes, your scenarios go up in a puff of smoke. So you really don't know how long the time between point 2 and stage 3 resolution is going to take. Now, stage 4 became particularly important to us at Container Solutions. Stage 4 is this learning stage where you take the crisis and your response to it and you start to unpack it. And within that unpacking, you find lessons learned that you can apply in the future. So our opinion, our thought was, well, if we're going to get battered around back like this, and if we're going to suffer as we are suffering, at least there's something to look forward to at the end of this shower of shit. Some wisdom, some lessons learned, potentially some new organizational capabilities. The other thing we picked up as we tried to frame this problem was this: 2 really valuable heuristics. Time and information are scarce in a crisis. As I mentioned earlier, this is why you make mistakes. A good decision is based on information and time to analyze it. And in a crisis, you've got neither. This was a good heuristic because it meant goodwill, compassion, forgiveness, and understanding that the only way through this was through failing forward were very powerful ideas for us to pick up. The other thing we learned is it's basically project management. Crisis management is project management with more empathy and less information. So for example, when we do cloud native transformations, you need compassion, you need empathy, because you're asking people to let go of systems they've spent decades building. But you need even more empathy when you're dealing with somebody whose wedding has been postponed, whose relatives ventilated at the local hospital, whose mortgage payments have been put on hold because of the uncertainty. So you need a ton of empathy. And then that would guide the tone of our communications and the way we would deal with each other. Now, the good news is we're quite good at project management. So within the heuristics, there was a little bit of hope. So on the back of the framing of the crisis, how did we go about designing our actions or coming up with our strategy? In the end, it boiled down to one simple idea. We would not trade cultural health for financial health. So cloud native teaches us you don't trade speed for quality, but you can get both. So straight off the bat, we said, this is what we're going to do. Where possible, we'll try to preserve cultural health and financial health. Now, a lot of companies at the time were doing mass layoffs, mass redundancies. And the idea is that if you protect the balance sheet, you can recreate your culture later. This is an assumption that we do not agree with. So we think that revenues and profitability can be rebuilt much more easily than you can rebuild the culture. The other thing we said at the time is that there will be no redundancies during the COVID pandemic at Container Solutions. We would all work for free if we had to, but there would be no redundancies. And the reason was simple. First of all, we thought it was morally wrong. Why would one group of people, for example, suffer more than a different group of people within our company? Everybody's doing the best and is working in a position of their strength. The second element of this was there were three key players out there: the government, citizens, and businesses. The government were rallying around trying to create furlough schemes and salary replacement schemes. Citizens had been asked to lock themselves down, wear masks, wash their hands, create space. We felt that businesses had a job to do, which was not to offload their problems onto the governments or onto the dole queues or the job centres. So we just thought that this was wrong and it was not in the spirit of what we were all trying to do in society at the time. Now, something happened there. When you close the door to redundancies, when you say that's not going to happen, your creative mind goes somewhere else. It goes to the actions you can take and the options you can take when you're not thinking about that. So in a sense, we crossed our bridges and then we burnt them as we crossed them. We will never return to that line of thinking. Once we'd done that, we could start designing actions that would move us forward. To assist us at the time, because we had no frameworks for dealing with this crisis, we started to plot 2D matrices, cultural health versus financial health. And we were simply looking for ideas and options that would strengthen our culture, strengthen our financial position, and not sacrifice either unless we absolutely had to. So what actions came off the back of that? This is about April time. Pretty easy, really. The key thing around communications was this. Our all hands would become weekly, and then we'd do a daily digest on Slack. This was to do with providing information, reducing anxiety, and connecting with each other so that we could create. We had a temporary structure. The managing director of Canada became our interim CTO, and everybody else moved to sales or customer satisfaction, with the exception of our CFO, Christian, who worked to stretch the cash. Everybody in engineering would focus on 100% customer support. So any side projects were put on hold, and most of our attentions in engineering tend to either go-to-market work or supporting our customers. This plan lasted 3 days. The original series of contract cancellations, which added up to 4.2 million euros, became 6.4 million. Every other day, there was a request for cancellation. And we thought, if this doesn't stop, we'll have zero revenue. At some point, it did stop, and the total loss was 6.4 million. Now, a pretty sickly and disgusting feeling started to arise in our bellies because we knew what had to be done. All costs in Container Solutions had been cut. Every single government scheme had been applied to, and every single tax deferment had been made. We only had one cost left, which was our salaries. Now, people have said to us, this was a brave decision, or what a great decision. This wasn't a decision. It was the easiest thing we had to do. It was a task on a list. We'd already agreed earlier that there'd be no redundancies. So that was off the table. What we then did was request a progressive salary cut. 30%-ish for high earners. Most people would sacrifice 25% of their salary, and the low earners and the interns would sacrifice less, and in some cases sacrifice nothing. Only 2 people pushed back against this idea. This was our first jaw-dropping moment. As a founder of a company, you want to create a healthy culture where you feel you're sharing and collaborating and working together. The fact that nearly everybody in our organization instantly accepted this as a next step, with the idea that we would build a bridge through to September when we could start selling again, was amazing. It was a jaw-dropping moment. Many people have said to me since then it was the proudest moment of their careers. Now, on the back of that, we had a board meeting. In the board, we agreed to issue some shares. We did not want to sell them to an investor out there, some random person we'd never met. So we said, where possible, we only want to sell them to the people at CS and our closest advisors, board of directors. Christian started arranging roundtables, 6 or 7 people per roundtable, to explain shares, options, bank details, etc., etc. By the time the first meeting was finished, we already had paperwork saying people wanted to invest. Within the first week, after a handful of these roundtables, we'd had €1 million pledged in investment money just from our people. This was remarkable. This was our second jaw-dropping moment. So overnight, and quite by surprise, we'd actually become employee-owned. We thought we needed about €600,000, and actually we raised 1.4 million in that round. When all of the paperwork was fixed and when this initial point of the crisis was over and that money was in our bank, that night I may have drank more than 4 cans of Stella. At that point, what happened next? What happened next after all the Stellas? Well, I woke up on that Saturday morning feeling pretty good, but it was very obvious we were fucked. Tired, strung out, bad-tempered, desperately in need of sleep, and for all of us who were locked down with our families, desperately in need of a break, a change in scenery. We needed some running repairs. We introduced No Meeting Wednesday. This was a great innovation. Wednesday will always be meetingless at Container Solutions. That's never coming back. So that was awesome. We took a mental health break, 2 days, and we all took it at the same time. What that meant is that people who were away didn't feel guilty, that they were not, doing their job or pulling their weight. That really worked as well. And we're going to look into different ways of bringing that back once the pandemic is gone. Most of us took off Fridays in August. Now, the idea was we would come back in September, refreshed and ready to go again. The truth is we were in a little bit of a slump in September. I got sick and I stayed sick for 4 weeks. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that was related to the stress. Just before those Belgian beers, when the paperwork on the investment was done, we'd worked for 84 days in a row at that point, Christian and I. So we were pretty tired. Nevertheless, as September changed into October, and then with the benefit of hindsight, we could start to sort of pull out a few lessons. COVID had given us this great gift, a tiny amount of time, basically no time at all, and this mountain of pressure. What that meant was we became desperate, but that changed into creative desperation. And on the back of that, we managed to get a few things that we actually quite wanted. First of all, around mental health. Container Solutions has got a lot of occupational psychologists. They've been very busy doing coaching and counselling. So we currently have a support system in to support those people who might need it. And obviously, as the crisis unfolds, different people will suffer at different times. So of course, we didn't come out of this unscathed, and I would never play down something like this, but we came out of it more or less okay, tired, a little bit battered around, but with the structures in place to support people moving forward. We've got a vastly improved structure, a number of new roles in engineering, and a new meeting rhythm. So right in the middle of all of this, we were reading this book, The IKEA Edge. And what Dalvik had done when he became the CEO of IKEA was basically to have a monthly meeting with his own team and the so-called layer beneath him. What that meant was, or his thinking was, if it's monthly, we'll talk about strategy. If it's more regular, it'll be too operational. He also said, if you do a monthly meeting, you'll spend the next few days debriefing the layer below. So just bring them into the meeting, work on this together, and then break and see each other the following month. Well, we adopted this structure right in the middle of the crisis, and it's working really, really well for us. So this is an extended meeting where we do problem solving and planning, retrospectives and forward-looking actions. We are 76% employee owned. This is a dream come true for everybody at Container Solutions. We've been trying to do this one way or another for ages, and we've finally done it. We also issued options. This was to make up for the 3 months salary sacrifice that everybody participated in. The 500 options are more in most cases than the salary itself, even though we do accept, you can't spend options. They've got special conditions attached to them. If somebody invests in CS, or if we're acquired by a larger company, they will instantly be changed into equity. So it's another small step to the employee ownership. And of course, in the middle of all of this, we launched a new content system called What the Fuck is Cloud Native? So back in July, we were too tired to filter ourselves, feeling extremely creative, and we were experimenting with different types of content, different webinars. Out of all of that emerged this idea of WTF Cloud Native. This goes live in about 2 days. And so even though we couldn't sell anything back in summer and everything had frozen to a halt, we were still creating and thinking of different ways we can engage with the community on the one hand and our potential customers or existing customers on the other hand. What can we make of all of this? What does it all mean? What are the takeaways? I think there's a few things that are really important. If your team or your business is currently entering into a part of this crisis that you're struggling to understand, I would take you back to the beginning of this talk. Think about framing the crisis in a way that works for you, framing it as a problem that you can solve. When it comes to your actions, you need guidelines. So we spent the weekends writing these out and sketching them out. When you're stressed and you're tired, it's hard to make decisions. Think about your value system. Think about the order in which you want to do things. You should ask the question, what do we want this crisis to look like in 12 weeks? It's not selfish. If you say to yourself, how do we want to win? What do we want to jettison? That's not a selfish question. It's a cognitive trick. It makes you lift your head up and focus on the future. So if you're to pull yourself through this and pull your team with you, it's worth asking that question. And remember this, at the beginning of our crisis, we had some intentions, the things we wanted to do. Reality kept changing. So a lot of our intended strategy ended up in the bin. A lot of ideas along the way emerged. WTF, the option scheme, the capital raise, the issue of shares, this all happened in flight. In this talk, it all looks like a neat straight line, but that's not how it works. It's messy. So in that middle bit, as ideas are bubbling up, you need to be flexible, you need to be talking a lot, and you need a lot of goodwill. But trust me, at one point, the path will start to become clear. And from the vantage point of the future, or with the benefit of hindsight, all of this will start to look coherent. Finally, the last thing I would say is this. It's been a tremendously emotional time for myself and for everybody in the company. A roller coaster of highs and lows. There've been tears, there've been beers. We know people out there are suffering too. All of this is normal. We are all human beings and we are all subject to the pressures of our work and this tremendously difficult situation we all found ourselves in. So if this talk has done anything, I hope it's this. It's a simple reminder that you are not alone. And for the duration of the conference today, we've got each other, we can swap notes and face the next part of this pandemic together. Thank you so much. Mark's over there. Hello, Mark.
Hello there. Okay.
Do you want to come on to this one?
Yeah, we're doing it like some sort of stage, aren't we? So, okay, I'm back on stage now. Thank you, Jamie. That was excellent. We've got some questions coming through.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Right.
So let me just pull those out live. Now, first and most importantly, I can almost guess who's in the chat with the level of facetiousness that's going on.
Yeah.
Marcel asks, why Stella, Jamie? Why Stella?
Well, in England, that's posh. It's a good question. Thank you, Marcella. So Stella Artois is very posh in England, especially in Yorkshire, where I'm from. Mark's from the other side of the Pennines. So, you know, there's just posh beer for me. Yeah.
Okay, let's get into some more. Someone asked where my costume is at, but I assume I'm also getting trolled with that one. Somebody says, because he has no taste in beer, I'm assuming that's Adrian Moat.
Yeah,
a serious question for a moment.
Yeah.
Jamie, what do you think the next 6 to 12 months will look like in terms of commercial activity within the cloud industry, especially regarding new lockdowns being announced?
I think this is a very good question. So I will tell you what my co-founder, Penny Resnick, said to me today. We have got access to analyst reports from Gartner, for example, if you believe any of that stuff. But obviously, we talked to our board of directors and we talked to people who are in the know. Two things have changed recently. Spending decisions have become centralized. What that means is all budget requests are coming under more scrutiny. So activities are taking longer to sign off. So for the short term, purchasing decisions are being put off. But within cloud, obviously, cloud computing makes businesses more resilient, more cost effective, and it lets them get their products quicker to market. So the best summary is this: a very bright future and a pretty dark present. But hang in there because we're all in it together.
Well, looking at that from another point, we've got an anonymous question here. Now, I'm going to have to interpret it a little bit because I'm not sure if I understand it correctly. But somebody says, I feel like I've wasted a lot of time in this pandemic. I'm feeling pretty demotivated. Any talk for students? I'm wondering if maybe this person is a student. Any advice, perhaps?
So I used to do a paper round when I was a kid. And when it was winding and raining, my mum used to say to me, oh, it's good for your character, which is the last... Being cold and covered in rain. And this is the last thing you want to hear when you're on your paper round. I think if you're a student that's recently graduated, I remember the anxiety I felt. Were you nervous when you graduated?
University?
Yeah.
I took about a year off. I wasn't very serious then.
Yeah, he's not a serious person. When I graduated, I'd been working a couple of years when the terrorist attacks in New York happened. George Bush had just been elected president, stealing the election from Al Gore because of the electoral college rules and the Supreme Court. It was a funny old time, and I remember being anxious. So, you know, that time of your life, oh my God, I sound like my mum. It's a funny old time of your life when you graduate. But I suppose if you try to keep calm, we've never had more access to online learning, never had more access to online courses. Keep speaking to your friends, keep socializing where you can. And yeah, I suppose one day at a time is how we would do it.
Yeah, I'm just asking if there are any more questions coming through, but thanks for that, Jamie. We do have, let's have a little look, about 8 minutes left. So if there are any more questions for Jamie, drop them into, we're basically using anything at this point. So you can use Q&A or the chat. I believe this time round, the chat is disabled on YouTube. So you're going to have to come into the Brella app to ask those questions. Of course, you can also go into Slack. You can send the email to softwarecircus@containersolutions.com. Maybe, Jamie, you could tell us a little bit more about what the fuck is cloud native and what people can expect in the next 2 days, did you say? Yeah,
it's coming out in the next couple of days. The thing about WTF is nobody knows the answer to the question. So some people think cloud native is a series of technologies, Kubernetes, public cloud, Docker containers, things like that. Some people think it's a series of processes, continuous delivery, programmable infrastructure, GitOps.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually all of those things.
Right.
At least I think that. But other people disagree. So WTF is just a way to bring the community together to try to answer that question. So Sam's going to come in next week and answer, WTF microservices. Later on, Matthew Skelton will answer WTF platform as a product.
So it's a series of events.
It's events, it's content, it's videos.
Got it. Okay, very nice. So be on the lookout for that. I assume that's going to be on the website?
It's all coming, yeah.
Okay, good.
Did I finish early?
You finished quite early, yeah.
This talk was perfect. I think you've made a mistake.
I don't think so. I mean, unless no one's screaming at us in the Slack, and it says here 45, so we've got 6 more minutes.
Oh, wow.
Although there are a bunch of announcements to make, so we're going to get into that as well.
Yeah.
But before we do it, just one more question. Vivek asks, given during pandemic we realized that work from home is as productive, what do you think of this as an opportunity to blur the borders and hiring best talent across regions?
I think it's probably going to happen. I think it's... in strategy, they talk about a forcing function, don't they? That there's something waiting, a technology that's ready or a new idea that society is ready, but unless there's a forcing function, you don't fully adopt it.
Right.
All these businesses around here are desperate to get their people back, but here in the city of London, it's an extremely old-fashioned place. I think new companies will definitely be thinking, and we're definitely thinking this, how can we tap in to all this remote talent And how can we make this the new normal? So I do think there'll be a shift. And my mum sent me a message today, house prices in Yorkshire are going up. And that's because people are like, well, if I don't have to work in London, why should I live here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting quandary at the moment, because we saw recently, I can't remember which company it was, being in the news for having employees move from the Bay Area somewhere else and the salaries being reduced. Now, if everyone's going to start moving out of the big cities, that might have a downward pressure on salaries in general, which I think might have serious consequences for the future of software. Couple more questions coming in. Let's do two, shall we? One of them is, can I get a Transylvanian accent from Mark? No, you can't. From P.I., what are the main areas which will drive growth in industry in the near future? What to focus on as someone looking to improve their technical skills?
Oh yeah, good question. What to focus on? Well, you should become a hairdresser. Hairdressing is very hard to automate. So
as is makeup, by the way.
Become a hairdresser, you'll be fine. So this is a funny old thing. Everybody, when a recession hits, there's always a pressure to automate. So shareholders, investors, they want you to automate because they want you to reduce labor costs. This leads to what are known as jobless recoveries. So the last jobless recovery was actually 6 years from when the recession ended to when all the jobs came back.
2008.
To the 2000, the so-called Great Recession. Now, every time these recessions happen, and we're in the biggest recession since then, and probably since the Great Depression, technologies evolve and automation happens. So I would say keep your eyes on any technologies that make businesses more resilient. This is the difference between this recession and the Great Recession. Back then, it was about cutting costs, getting our companies to do more with less. All of a sudden, resilience matters. Can you do strategic planning iteratively? Will your system stay up 99% of the time without human intervention? So all of a sudden, there's this huge trend. How do we become more resilient as businesses in preparation for the next COVID? So any technology that contributes to business resilience will be something that's very interesting in the near future.
I've got one more that we're going to try and fit in, because I think it's a really good question, but it'll have to be quite a concise answer, Jamie.
I can do it. Yes.
Great talk, Jamie. Thank you. How did you run the all hands meetings? Topics decided by leadership and then lean coffee style, or with topics suggested and vote for by attendees? I think this is during the crisis time.
Bloody hell, it's a difficult one, Matt. The first all hands was we literally all got together and we were like, what the actual F? That was what we asked. And everybody spoke. There was people from all over the company speaking. Now, moving forward, we tried to get this a little bit more structured. To be fair, it was probably a bit broadcasty. This is what's happened. This is what we're going to do. This is where we need to be by Wednesday.
Right.
But as things have opened up and calmed down, we've becoming much more participatory. Thank you, Mark. And now we're doing retrospectives, hierarchy flat discussions, and trying to build up that next level of strategy as a group.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for that, Jamie. Just one more comment from Raw Code Horror Show, who says there was actually time to keep marking the talk. After all, cut for no reason, harsh. I think we'll end on that. But thank you very much. We've got about 90 seconds left. Do you want to wait here while I do the announcements?
I'll definitely wait. Yes,
cool.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so quickly, up next, we have Software Circus TV. So that's over on track 3, where it's scary music time. Now, I'm pretty sure I know who it is, but I wasn't involved in the organization this time, so fingers crossed. Also, just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. So we've got Equinix Metal, Cycloid, Giant Swarm, and Instana. Go to Brella. They've all got booths. So you can go on there. There's like a virtual event floor. You can go to their booths. They're staffing them. There are people you can speak to. And I believe they've got fun prizes and giveaways. Last thing to point out before we go to the music is all the things you can look forward to today. So make sure you're tweeting on Software Circus Fest is the hashtag. We've got DJ set coming up. We've got chair yoga. Scary music's up next. Cocktail masterclass. Pumpkin carving competition hosted or judged by Equinix Metal. I'm going to have to do my research on that one. Costume contest, of course. You need to be posting pictures of yourself to Software Circus Fest on Twitter.
Don't forget the T-shirts. 200 T-shirts to give away with the hashtag Software Circus Fest.
Yeah.
Get into that.
Well, actually, for that one, all you have to do is join Brella. But I think, we will favor people who tweet more. So definitely try that too.
We won't do that.
All right. That's it for now. We're going to go to the music. Thank you very much. And we'll be back in 15 minutes with the next speaker. Bye-bye.